folks, this is Cindy. Thanks so much for stopping by. In today's video, we're going to be Copic coloring Clovers with the Power Poppy Wish You Luck digital stamp. St. Patrick's Day is just a few weeks away, and I thought that this digital stamp was darling. And we're going to be talking about how I only use 3 Copic markers to do the majority of this coloring and get that depth and dimension and that texture within the stamp. Now, I have this printed out on an express blending card. I have it cut down to 8 inches by 8 inches. It is going to go into a picture frame with a 5 by 5 inch mat. I've been doing that a lot lately. I've really been enjoying these prints. The first thing that I need to look at, though, is I need to look at where I need to go the darkest in my image. I'm going to start there. I'm not going to follow any specific pattern per se. Like, I'm not going to start on one side of the image and work my way to the other side or anything like that. I'm just strictly looking for these darker areas. If you take a look at this digital stamp, you can see where there's these really fine lines illustrated within the image. That indicates where you want that shade to go. So I'm going to take a look at that and start there. I'm using my Copic B34 to start these shaded areas, and I'm getting right down in there where it's going to be the darkest, putting that B34 in there, and then going over the top of that with that YG17. Now, on some of these Clover leaves, I'm going to take that YG17 and I'm going to color in the entire one side of one of those leaves. This is also going to give me a little bit of extra depth and dimension in this. So I'm really playing up these lights and the shadows and the shades with just these 3 colors, and I'm picking and choosing where I'm placing them in order to get it. So this little clover leaf here next to the first one I did, that one's going to be a majority of B34 because it's underneath a couple of other clovers there. Then I'm going to bring in that YG17, and I left just a tiny little spot for that YG03 to finish that off. Now I'm going to continue to go through this image in the same way. Right now I have my B34, my YG17, and my YG03, and I'm strictly looking for those darker areas. That's all I care about right now. The rest of them I'm going to deal with when the time comes. So that B34 gets me that darker shaded color. By using that B34 underneath that YG17, I am desaturating the YG17 and it pushes it back a little bit further. YG17 by itself is very nice, a mid-tone color, but putting that B34 underneath it really just pushes it just a tiny bit more. Now I am going to be bringing in my colored pencils and reinforcing this soon, as soon as I have this colored in, but in the meantime, that B34 really gets me the majority of the way with that depth and that shadow. Now again, on some of these, I'm going to use more B34 than on others, and this is just a really good way to kind of play with a little bit of texture with your shadows. So you can add more B34 down one side of a leaf than what you would on another leaf that's next to it, and it's going to make that one look like it's bending away from you, or it has more shadow, so it recedes away from the eye. And then the clover leaf next to it that doesn't have as much B34, it doesn't have any B34 at all, it's going to look like it's coming closer to the eye. So it's all one clover, but you're getting this visual texture, depth, and dimension, and you're only using 3 markers to do it. Now, on some of these clover leaves as well, even though they look a little bit closer to the surface, I am going to add all 3 of those colors and push them back a little bit further. The one I had just done, that was in between 2 clovers. I want the 2 clovers that are next to, on both sides of that one, I want those to stand out and that one there in the middle to push back. That is another trick into getting that texture and that dimension. So I'll keep working through these until I have everything done that I feel that I feel needs B34 to it, and then I can move on to other Copic work. So right now I'm done with everything that I absolutely know for certain that I want to be pushed the darkest in this image. Now I can start working on another level of coloring here. So on this one, I just put the majority of that B34 on one side of that clover leaf and left the rest of it just YG17 and YG03. But I'm not going to color in the other leaves like that. I'm going to skip those for now because those at some point are going to be just YG17 and YG03. And again, I get that depth and that dimension, but I get a little bit of that visual texture with the highlights in the shadows. This one, I'm going to do that again. I want the B34 on there, but I'm going to skip the other two clover leaves that are on this one and move on to something else. Again, with this one, I'm going to go a little bit darker on this one, but not as much as I had done on the other ones, just a tiny, tiny bit with that B34. And I also want to make this clover leaf look like it's bending at the tip of it, that it's bending away from the eye. So I'm adding a little bit of it there. Now, at all times, I am making sure that either the B34 or the YG17 go up at least to those little dashes that are illustrated in the middle of each of those. That's kind of important because the species of clover that I'm referencing, they are darker there in the center. Now, there's lots and lots of different species. There's about 300 species of clovers. So you have lots of references to pull from, but the one that I'm going with is definitely darker there in the center. It's still green, it's just a darker green. So on this clover here, I'm dropping that B34 altogether, and I'm starting with that YG17, and then I'll finish that off with my YG03. I'm also making sure that I add a line down the center of each of these clover leaves, regardless of the colors that I'm using, because I want to make it look like it has a little bit of a fold there in the center of it. These clovers in real life actually do kind of fold down, straight down the center, so I'm kind of playing that up a little bit with my YG17, and I can add more detail to that with my colored pencils when the time comes. Right now, I just want to get that Copic coloring in there. Now, I was coloring along here with just the YG17 and the YG03, and I looked at this one and thought, you know, I could add just a little bit of B34 there. I felt like it needed to be balanced a little bit. This is one of those projects that you really just kind of need to use your smarticles, folks. I really thought about how I could present this video, and honestly, there isn't any specific technique to it outside of where I'm choosing to add those shadows. I'm not doing any specific type of flicking. In fact, my blends aren't even 100% on them. I'm just making sure that I'm getting that color down on these clovers and making sure that there's enough ink on each of them that they do blend nicely, but I'm not making sure that my flick strokes are perfect or anything like that. This is really something that you can kind of figure out on your own, and I would love it if you guys shared that with me over my Facebook. I do have that link down below. This is one of those things I'd like to see what other folks do with a project like this. It'd be really interesting. I'm coloring in the bottom here. This is where these stems are sticking out underneath these this ribbon. If you want to see how I did that darker shaded area on the inside of this posy, I do have a full-length video available over on Patreon where I walk you through that, and I did make sure that you could actually see what I was doing, so you can check that out on Patreon, and I have that link down below if you're interested in that as well. So I'm going to finish this off here, and then I need to start coloring in that ribbon. As of yet, I have skipped those flowers. I'm going to save those for last, and I'm going to save those for last because I'm going to color them in white, and I need to have all of that color done around me with as much depth and shade as I want in that in order to get a good visual representation of how dark I want to go on the shadows when I color in those white flowers. Because remember, when you're coloring in white, you're just coloring in shadow. So in order to get that depth right, I want all this other coloring done first. On this ribbon, I'm starting with a Y21, and I kind of drew myself a little bit of fence there down each side of that, and I did make sure that I had some of that Y21 up underneath that clover that is hanging over this, and I also need to make sure that I have this Y21 around those buttons there because they would cast a little bit of a shadow. I'm going to kind of make these look like they are more of a pearl button that stands up quite a bit. I do believe that don't quote me, but I do believe that Marcella illustrated those to be a pearl pin. But I'm going to go for more of a button style, and I want it to stick up just a little bit on there. So I'm getting that shadow in there. When I'm done with the Y21, I'm going to come in with those Y11. I'm going to go right over the top of that 21, but I want to make sure that I don't scrub. That Y11 will eat away at that Y21 if you're not careful. So you do need to make sure that you're not scrubbing and knocking that back too far. I will reinforce some of this shadow with my colored pencils, but I don't want to have to do too much work in order to get that shade back in there. Is when I was done with the Y11, I finished that off with the Y00, and for now, I'm going to call that good. Now I'm coloring in these flowers. I am starting with the BV20. BV20 does not seem too terribly dark. However, if I'd started with this color first, without having any of that greenery done, it would have felt extremely dark. That's kind of the nature of it. If you don't have any color reference around colors like these when you're doing whites, it automatically feels too dark. But look at that. Next to that white, or next to that green, it doesn't feel that dark at all. When I was done with the BV20, I came in with a B60, blended that out, and called it good. I do still have some legitimate white paper left on that, and that's exactly what I wanted. To reinforce the shading in these green, in all of this green, I'm using the Prismacolor in indigo blue. I went right in there where I had the B34, brought that out a little bit, and then finished that off with a Prussian green. Again, you can see more of that on Patreon. I talk about that more in depth there. To finish off these flowers, I'm bringing in the indigo blue again, and I'm just going in where I feel I need to push that just a little bit darker. And these are just really fine, super thin lines. I have a very sharp pencil and a really light hand, and I'm just barely getting that indigo blue in there. I am going to bring in the periwinkle, and I'm going to add that over the top of that BV20, just about into where I had blended it out with the B60, and then I'm going to call that good. Again, I'm just going to leave as much white paper in this as I possibly can. These need to read white, and in order to do that, I need to color in the shadow, but still leave some white surface on it. I kind of go back and forth on these, on all of the flowers a little bit to get them where I want them, and I'm only taking them in one petal at a time. I'm not going to go in with all of my colors and the entire flower all at once. I just kind of go in one petal at a time, eyeball it, work at it until I get it where I want it. It is super important to keep a light hand, folks. You need to be able to do that in order to build up these colors with your colored pencils. You don't want to break down the fibers on those papers, because then you're going to get to the point where you cannot add any more color and it will ruin it. Okay, so now I am ready to start coloring in this ribbon. Now, I actually start with the Prismacolor in the grade lavender for all of my shading here. However, by the time I get this done, I decided that it's not quite dark enough for me. Now, this isn't wrong at all. This was just a call on my part that I made. You could absolutely use the grade lavender and call it good. I decided because it wasn't dark enough, I dropped the grade lavender. Now I'm bringing in the Parma Violet, and I'm going in where I had all of that Y21 in here. Now going in with this Parma Violet, it's kind of freaky deaky, folks. It's going to feel dark and it's going to feel really purple. However, if you decide to stick with the Parma Violet, stick with it. Stick with it till the end, because you're going to be surprised. If you've never seen this before, you're going to be surprised how that turns out. I'm also using the indigo blue and that periwinkle on those buttons, just like I did with those flowers, and I just stuck to the bottom right hand corner of each of those. Blended that up there. I don't know if you could see it here in the video, but in real life I can still see some of that white paper left, and these read like white buttons. They just have some shading down one side of them. So now I'm going to finish up this Parma Violet, and then I'm going to come in with my Mineral Orange. At this point with the Parma Violet, I'm just going over the top of where those lines are illustrated already. I'm not going to add any more of that if I don't have to. I do want to make sure that I have a really nice clean line down each side of this ribbon, because it needs to look clean, and it also needs to look like it's receding away from the eye. Now, if you have followed me for a while, you will have seen this color combination before and how this turns out. But if you're new here, take a look at this. I'm going over the top of that Parma Violet with Mineral Orange. What is happening here is just like with that B34 and that YG17, that Parma Violet is actually desaturating this Mineral Orange. So I'm going over the top of the Parma Violet with the Mineral Orange, and I'm bringing it out just a little bit. So now I'm actually getting two shades of orange here, and it's going to look pretty orange, and you're going to be wondering, well, this is a yellow ribbon, why are you making this orange? But I'm not done yet. I still have one more colored pencil to bring in, and it's going to look yellow by the time I'm done. Desaturating is generally the best way to go to get the most out of those shadows. I don't have an orange shadow on this ribbon. In real life, it wouldn't be an orange shadow. It would actually be a darker desaturated yellow. So this color combination gets me to that point. Violet is a complementary color to yellow. The mineral orange is a nice complement to the yellow ochre that I'm adding now. So this is how I'm getting that deeper shadow. And again, it's still going to look like a yellow ribbon. If I were to go darker and darker with my yellow or use a darker orange by itself, it's going to look like I have an orange ribbon, and I don't. I have a yellow ribbon. So check this out, folks. Now that I'm coming in with that yellow ochre, and I went over the top of the Parma Violet and the mineral orange and brought that out, I did leave some of that Y00 to shine through, but look at that. I now have a dimensional yellow ribbon, and that is perfect. To finish off these clovers, I'm bringing in a Derwent pencil and also the Prismacolor white pencil, and I'm going to alternate with these. The clovers that I want to go that are darker, I'm going to use that Derwent on. These ones that are lighter, I'm using the Prisma white on them, and this is where I'm pulling from my reference photo. These clovers in my reference have a little bit of a white jagged or zigzagged line that goes through the clover leaf itself, so I'm getting that in there with these colored pencils. And I did add some Sakura clear glaze to the center of those flowers as well as those buttons. You could definitely add some shimmer to the highlights on those flowers, and that would be super cute. I figured since this was going in a frame, there was no reason for me to do that. And that is it, folks. We are done. We are good to go. I have links down in the description below for the products I used today, as well as over on my blog. Please leave me a comment letting me know if you celebrate St. Patrick's Day, how you celebrate it, or if you celebrate it. I would really love to hear from you. I hope you enjoyed my project today. If you did, hit that like button and share it with your friends. Also, be sure to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and tap that bell next to the subscribe button so you can receive all notifications. Thanks again so much for stopping by. Until next time.